Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy and The Long Ride Home. Before I jump in with today's guest, I want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do here, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really, really helps us to make the progress. To find out about our certification courses, online video libraries, books, and other courses, please go to rupertisaacson.com. So now let's jump in. Welcome back to Live Free, Ride Free. I've got a very, very dear friend, old friend, Paul Illingworth here. Paul is someone I've known for quite a while and who has done many, many, many interesting things in his life. And one of the reasons I asked him to come on was he really started from a place that I wouldn't say disadvantaged, I wouldn't say advantage, but I'd say without an awful lot of support, and made his way in the world and has actually helped quite a few people along the way as well, and has been a great supporter of our work with Horseboy Foundation and the work we've done with autism and that sort of thing. Big guy, big heart, big story. What I'd quite like to frame this story against, though, is I think we all know that we're dealing with a bit of an epidemic at the moment of lost young men, lost boys. And this is something that's kind of crept up on us over the last 10, 15, but it's become more acute since COVID. And in the work that I do, I get a lot of mums who have, say, 3 kids, daughters doing great, one married and off in the career, one at college and getting her master's, and a son aged 21 to 25 who can't come out of the basement. And this never used to be the case. And it occurred to me, while we were doing this podcast, why is this? And friends of mine that I've known who could have been lost boys, but who went out into the world to find themselves. Can we examine this question a little bit? How do you find your way to this kind of self-actualization? It's a pressing question at the moment. So, Paul, thanks for coming on the show. Can you tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about who you are and what you do currently, and then we'll start with how you got there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my name is Paul Illingworth. I currently live in Texas. I've been over here for 27 years now. I moved over here back in 1998 when I was working in the oil and gas business. I'm now actually retired. And I moved from Aberdeen to Houston in 1998 to start a business there for a very good friend of mine whose company was actually based in Singapore. So I came over here. I was supposed to initially come to Texas for 3 months to get the business started, then go back to Aberdeen and carry on what I was doing over there. And things kind of snowballed. I was very, very lucky, and that having made the decision that I did want to move to Texas, that I managed to get myself a green card pre 9/11, which happened very quickly, and now it takes about 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's taken at least 10 years to get a green card. And then I lived in Houston for 14 years and then moved out to the country. I live about 30, 40 miles northeast of Austin, out in the countryside. I've got a 20-acre ranch here. I continued Houston for a while after we did move out of the Houston area because I was still working there. And then I finally retired from the oil and gas business in 2019, ran my own business in Austin until about a couple of months ago when we sold the business. So now I am officially retired.
So you make yourself sound like a bloke who's sort of just kind of climbed the corporate ladder. It's anything but the case. And just so that listeners get a bit of an idea, while I've known Paul, because I used to live in Austin as well, I've known him running a skydiving business, which is keeping people alive while you chuck them out of airplanes. Not easy. And I've also known you run a series of escape rooms as well, even when you didn't have to, even when you retired from the oil and gas business. Because one of the things about Paul, ladies and gentlemen, is he gets bored very fast, and he can't, he can't abide not having something to do, and he tends to be very successful at what he does. Before we start with how you got up through the non-corporate ranks of your career, Why do you think it is, Paul, that when you pick up a business, you make it work? I've only ever seen you make them work, and I've often watched you kind of a bit awestruck and go, what's he got? What is this Midas touch that Paul's got? What do you put it down to?
I don't actually think I do have a Midas touch at all because I've over the years I've been involved in four, maybe five different businesses. The skydiving business was very, very much an opportunistic thing whereby my wife Jen and myself were skydivers. I started jumping when I was in the military originally, but we got into sports skydiving in the early 2000s in Texas. The weather's a lot better over here, so obviously it's a lot easier to skydive than it was living in Scotland. And an opportunity came up to buy a drop zone that was very poorly managed, not particularly well run. And the guy and the girl that owned it were ready to leave and go do something else. So the wife and I could just simply see the potential there that we could really turn it into something special. And we did. We invested a bit more money in. We bought another couple of airplanes. We both got ourselves certified as
I love how you say,
pilots.
oh, and we bought another couple of airplanes.
Yeah,
Just as
well,
you do, just I'm actually nipping out to get one now, Paul. Do you want me to
yeah, right,
pick one up
yeah,
for you as
yeah,
well?
yeah. We're not talking about Cessna citations or billion-dollar airplanes. Skydiving airplanes tend to be at the bottom end of the barrel as far as airplanes are concerned. So it wasn't really terribly difficult. We didn't have to put a lot of money in it, but. So to start off with, we just started very, very small and we built things up slowly. And over the 13 years we owned the business, we turned it into a very, very successful business with a lot of hard work. I mean, it was hard, Rupert.
I remember it
Uh, you
stressing
know,
you. Yeah.
I was working as the CEO of an oil and gas service company, spending about 200 days a year traveling overseas, working in business development. And we were also running the skydiving business that was open 7 days a week. We would travel out to the skydiving business at the weekends. We had a manager out there that ran it during the week. And my wife was a skydiving instructor and I would be flying the airplanes. We worked 7 days a week. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And then
So it's just putting
after
in the hours.
it's just putting the hours in. It's as simple as that. I mean, I'll be quite honest with you. I didn't get where I was in this position in the world today by sitting around reading a newspaper and watching television. You've got to be prepared to work hard, and that's all there is to it. But it's finding the thing to do. And as you mentioned, the escape room business as well. That Jen and I love doing escape rooms, and it's the same thing. We love skydiving, bought a skydiving business. We love escape rooms. An escape room business came up for sale that was 30 minutes drive from our house here in Austin. We went and had a look at it, looked at the books, thought, I think we can make something out of this and actually do better. And that's what we did. But it's almost like, they say, what's the best thing about owning a boat? Well, the best thing about owning a boat is when you sell it. And it's a bit like owning a business. You've got to have an exit strategy if you own a business. We had an exit strategy for the skydiving business. We had an exit strategy for the escape room business. And
What
we
were those
implemented.
strategies?
Well, it was basically just simply get to a certain point in terms of income and own the business for so many years. The skydiving business was supposed to be 10 years and X number of dollars of profit. We ended up owning the business for 13 years. It just took a little bit longer to sell it than we expected. The escape room business, we had a 5-year plan. We hit all the targets on the escape room business, despite the fact that we bought it a year before COVID. Well, we bought it 6 months before COVID actually happened. But very quickly, we recovered after COVID, expanded the business as well, took a punt that things would come back strong, and they did. We had a 5-year plan. We sold the business. If you look at COVID and when COVID sort of started to ease off a little bit, we sold the business 5 years from then, 3 months ago.
Okay.
Um, so, uh, uh, you know, I've been lucky, Rupert. It's not, but you've got to be prepared to work hard. You've got to seize an opportunity when you see it and never be afraid to go and do something. That's really what it comes
Well,
down
well
to.
let's talk about Never Be Afraid. So again, for listeners, you will have read the show notes, so you actually know the sort of slightly more swashbuckling story that Paul is giving away right now. But we're going to go back and we're going to swash and buckle a bit. You know, Paul, I also know you as an aviator. I also know you as ex-Special Forces. I also know you as ex-Merchant Navy. And I know you, and all of these tough environments to come up through. Rugby league, in which there's a ton of fear. And okay, you're a big guy. Whenever I'm referring to Paul to friends, I would automatically say Big Paul. You're a big guy, but that's being big's not. You know how it is. It's not the dog in the fight; it's the fight in the dog. You've had to face an awful lot of fear in your life. So let's dial back now. Let's start with you as a boy. Where are you born? How did you grow up? And then how do you end up going from there to the military? And then let's take it from there.
Okay. I was actually born in Australia, but at a very, very early age, my parents moved back to London. So let's talk about my father for a start. My father joined the Scots Guards in 1936 when he was 16 years old. So well
Please tell
before
us
the
what the
second.
Scots Guards are, because not every listener's going to know.
Okay, so I think there's 5 or 6 guards regiments in the UK. They're basically the guys that wear the red tunics and have the big hats, the big black hats, and they do the guard at Buckingham Palace. So
Right.
those are what the guards do.
But they're also
There's
crack troops when it
Yes,
comes
they're
to
all
combat.
very, very much crack troops. They're always at the front of pretty much any battle. My dad joined in 1936, but he actually started work at 10 years old down the mines. He was a Yorkshire-born lad in Castleford in Yorkshire, which is in northern England. And at 10 years old, he was working down the coal mines.
Which is
So,
amazing. I'm thinking about my son Kirian, who you know, little
hmm
man. He's 10 now, and
hmm
he was just on the field helping me pull ragwort, and I'm feeling a bit guilty about, asking him to, help me out. And now you say 10, your dad was down the mines in
Yeah,
Yorkshire back then. Wow,
he was working
different
down the
times.
mines, which was a hard thing to do because his father was actually killed when he was 3 years old in a mine crash.
Okay.
So he was raised by his aunt. His mother, I think my grandmother on my father's side died when he was a very, very early age. I'm not really too sure, but he was basically brought up on his own by my aunt. He joined the Scots Guards in 1936, as I said, before the Second World War started. I don't really know why, other than the fact that he wanted to get out the mines. And the earliest you
Well,
could join the
why not?
army
Why
was
not a Yorkshire
16.
Line regiment? Yeah. Why the Scots Guards? He's not wasn't Scottish, and
That that I honestly don't know, Rupert. I mean, I really don't. I
yeah.
think he probably just headed down to London at 16 with the idea of doing something, and the Scots Guards took him on.
And you
There's
have
a
to be tall, right, to go in the Guard. So he was probably a
you got to
tall.
be you got to be at least 6 foot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they've dropped that requirement now, but in those days you had to be 6 foot. My dad was 6'2", pretty much the same as
Mm.
I was. Yeah, so he was a pretty big guy as well. And he was in the Scots Guards. He went to North Africa with the
In the
Eighth
war.
Army. Yeah, during the war.
It's
As
where
soon
my
as the war
grandfather was too.
was
Yeah.
he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was part of the Eighth Army, and then he ended up being recruited into the LRDGs, which is the Long Range Desert Group, and those guys were the forerunners to the formation of the SAS. So the LRDGs, Long Range Desert Group, they basically used to go and scout things out in North Africa, which is where they were formed, and then the SAS were formed in North Africa. I think it was in 1942. I can't remember exactly what
Mm.
the date was. So he was a career soldier pretty much. He stayed in the Scots Guards until I think it was 1948 or 1950. He got injured pretty badly at Monte Cassino during the Second World War when they were fighting coming up through Italy. And he took some time off then and he went back in again. But eventually he was medically discharged because he took some shrapnel in his back and never really recovered properly from it. But very, very much an army man. That's what he was. My mother also lied about her age during the Second World War and ended up being what they call an ACAT girl. So in London, she was firing the guns at the German aircraft that were coming over bombing London. And they met in London somewhere around about 1950. I'm not too sure exactly when it was, but that's when my parents got together.
And okay, so how did they end up going to Australia? How did they end up having you? And
All
then
right.
how
Well,
do you come
my
back?
dad, okay, my dad got into the building business with my uncle, who was my mother's brother. They got into rebuilding London. That's really what it came down to. And they had a pretty successful building business in London in the early 50s. And there was an opportunity because on my mother's side of the family had Australian connections because my grandfather went down to Australia. He was a policeman. He went down to Australia back in the 20s, I think it was, the 20s and the 30s. So there was family connections down there. And they decided to go to Australia because there was a lot of building going on the west
Mm,
coast in Perth.
mm,
So they went down there, and that's how I ended up being born down there, basically. But there was a lot going on in London, and my dad felt that he really had to get back to London, which was where the main thrust of the business was. So that's why
mm.
we moved back there when I was 3 months old.
All right. So you are then born and brought up in London.
Pretty much, yep. You can say that we lived in Bayswater. The earliest recollections I have of like 3, 4 years old was living in a townhouse in Bayswater. And we pretty much stayed there until my dad had his first back problem, which was what caused him to end up having to sell his business, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of like almost leads to the story of how we ended up living in a council house on social security with no
Okay.
money because he ended up losing the business. I think people took advantage of him, or should I say, he was a bit too generous with the way that he was doing things. And he went from having a very successful building business to nothing in a fairly short period of time.
And being somewhat of an invalid from the war moves.
Yes. Yeah, as well. He had a spinal fusion. I think the first one was in 1962 when I was 6 years old. And he was laid up in bed for 3, 4 months with that. And he
Mm.
never really fully recovered. Spinal fusions, even nowadays, are dodgy things. Back in the 60s, it was horrendous, the stuff that they were doing. And he never really recovered and he never really was able to work again. He had a second spinal fusion a couple of years later because the first one didn't take, and that was even worse. And it just got to the point where he couldn't do anything.
Right. So he went from being kind of a swashbuckling, semi-piratical war hero
Yeah.
to a successful entrepreneur to losing it and being an invalid
Yeah.
with a young family. So it must
That
have
pretty
taken
much,
a
yeah.
big knock to his self-esteem, I would have thought.
It was, and he was never the easiest of people to get on with, but obviously because he was in a lot of pain,
Mm.
he became very, very difficult to live with.
Bitter, perhaps.
To the point where, my I have a younger sister who's 4 years younger than me, and we pretty much both realized as we were growing up that the best thing to do was get out of the house and spend as much time out of the house as possible, which is literally what we did. Just as my dad did at 10 years old, I got myself a paper round and started working. So at 10 years old, I was getting up at 5 o'clock in the
And where
morning
was
delivering
that? Which
newspapers.
part of London was that?
That was in, we moved out to the country to Hertfordshire, so about 30 miles north of central London.
Mm.
And we moved into a council house out there. So I was delivering newspapers on a housing estate in a place called Hoddesdon,
I know
which is in
Hoddesdon. Yeah.
Hertford. You know Hoddesdon, yeah.
Yeah. Near Hitchin. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I helped with a milk round at the weekends, but 7 days a week, no matter what the weather was doing, I was up delivering newspapers. And
Yeah.
my mum and dad didn't have any money, so in order to, if you wanted anything, I mean, I can remember I bought my first pair of Levi jeans myself because my mum and dad couldn't afford anything. We were living off social security,
Yeah.
and that was all done through paper round money.
So you become, yeah, that boy who's out there making a bit of money pre-adolescence. Take us now into your adolescence. Where does it go from there?
Mm. Well, I did pretty well at school. God knows why. I actually do have a relatively high IQ. Not that anybody realized that at the
You
time,
hide
but
it
I
well, Paul.
really, yeah, I struggled with reading, Rupert, and I guess that now I would be what you would call I was dyslexic,
Right.
basically. I was
But you
very,
still
very,
got through the school system, though.
yeah, it was a bit of a struggle. I was very, very good at maths, but I couldn't read and writing was a struggle for me.
Right.
And at the age of 11, when you had to do what was called
Eleven
what was it?
plus.
The 11 plus. That's it, the 11 plus. I had to do the 11 plus. And I managed to pass the 11 plus barely, which gave me access to go into local grammar school.
Okay.
But my parents couldn't afford the school uniform. And there was a secondary modern school only about half a mile from where we lived. So I went to a secondary model school. But I did manage to pass the 11 plus. And then, but the first couple of years at school, I really struggled with English. And even then, I think moving forward a little bit, when I came to join the Navy, one of the qualifications I needed to become an officer in the Navy was I had to have an English O level. I failed it 3 times. I had math A level, physics A level, technical drawing, chemistry, and one other. I had 4 A levels, but I couldn't pass English O level. That's
Wow.
how bad I was. I mean, really. So, I managed to take it and get it eventually, and that then allowed me to join the Navy. But I was going to go in the forces. It was either that or go to university. But again, going to university in those days without any money was very, very difficult. I actually wanted to be an architect because of my dad's connection with the building business.
Mhm.
Even though he was invalided, he did teach me a lot of stuff growing up. I got a lot of skills that he taught me. I mean, he taught me how to lay bricks. He taught me how to solder pipe, how to do electric work, which you're messing around as a kid with 220 volts isn't a lot of fun if you get it wrong.
Yeah.
But he gave me all of the basic skills that I think I built on as I got older myself.
Right.
But I left school when I was 16. I could have stayed on, but I had the qualifications that I needed to join the Navy as a cadet officer. My dad wanted me to go in the army, as you can imagine. He did not want me to go in the Navy. My first choice was the Air Force, but I would have had to have gone to college to become a flight officer because they didn't take you straight from school. So the Navy was the best way for me to go into the armed forces as an officer without having to go to university and spend a whole hell of a lot of money. That's why I ended up joining the Navy.
Let's just before we get to the Navy, you spent a little bit of time playing professional rugby as
Hmm.
well, and not rugby union, but rugby league. And I think people need to know what the difference is.
Yeah. So,
How did that happen, and then how did that
all
parlay into the forces?
right. So, my dad, growing up in Yorkshire, as a Yorkshireman, played rugby league. There's a big divide between, well, there was in those days, not so much now, but rugby union was played down south in the UK, which was a non-professional sport that was just simply played for fun. Guys played it at the weekend, they didn't get paid. Rugby league was a professional sport, just like soccer was in the UK then, where you actually got paid to play. Rugby league was only played in the north of England. My dad played rugby league when he was a kid growing up, and also when he was a teen, and I think even not after the war, but before the war, he played rugby league, and he played for Castleford, which was the town he grew up in. So I kind of grew up with a rugby ball in my hands all the time. I always had a rugby ball, never really played soccer. So when I went into secondary school, they didn't play rugby because it was a secondary school. Only the grammar schools played rugby. The secondary schools played soccer. I was very lucky because at 11 years old, when I went into secondary school, which is like the American high school, we got a new gym teacher, stroke coach, who was a Welshman that was very much into rugby. I had a desire to play rugby, and the school I went to, it wasn't the best of schools, shall we say. There was a very, very high proportion of Italian immigrants lived in the area that I lived in. And those guys, although they were all soccer mad, they also liked to fight. So, rugby being a lot more physical game than soccer, they saw it as an opportunity to go on the pitch, throw a ball around, and fight with different people. And
Isn't
so
that
I
what it is?
invested pretty much. Yeah, I even today it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
So I ended up with the gym teacher, if you like, at 11, 12 years old, starting a rugby team at the school. We didn't have any H posts or anything like that, so we had to play on the soccer pitch. And we managed to get a group of guys together that were interested in playing rugby. So, with what I knew about rugby and obviously what our Welsh gym teacher knew, who'd played rugby for virtually all of his life, we managed to get things together and get a rugby team going. The first game that we played, the very first season, We lost 50-0. We got absolutely hammered, but there was a lot of fighting, which my guys really, really liked. And then things sort of moved on from there. And as the years passed, we got better and better and better. It was always the same guys, just moving from one year up to the next. I was captain of the rugby team pretty well from day one, because I was the only person who actually knew anything about the game to start off with. And the last year that I was at school, we actually did very, very well. We won the county cup. I got capped for Hertfordshire, for Southeast England, and I actually got a junior cap and played for England as well. So as a result of that, I was scouted, if you like, to go and play rugby league.
What position did you play?
Number 8.
Okay.
So number eight is the guy that's at the very back of the pack. So you've got your forwards which are in a pack, and I was at the very back. So I played number 8. Now in rugby union, there's 15 players. Rugby league, there's only 13 because they have 2 less people in the pack. And the position I played in rugby union as number 8 was called lock forward in rugby league. So I ended up getting scouted and was offered an opportunity to go and play for Featherstone Rovers. And as a result of that, I went to Featherstone.
How old are you at this point?
I was 15.
Wow.
So it would have been an opportunity to play for what they call the Colts team. And basically, you learn to play rugby league. It's rugby, but it's a different type of rugby. It's very, very different from rugby union. And I'd never played rugby league before. So I went there for 6 weeks.
What's the main difference?
Oh, the main difference basically is when somebody is tackled in rugby union and you end up going down on the ground, the pack form around you in order to be able to protect the ball and keep the ball on your side. With rugby league, when you're tackled, you get up and you just kick the ball back. So there's no rucking, what they call rucking. So rugby league is kind of a faster game than rugby union was at the time. But it also was a tough game. It was played by minors, basically. It was Yorkshire, it was Lancashire. It was tough. And for a London boy to go up to Yorkshire and try to play rugby league, it just didn't work. It wasn't I wasn't used to the environment to live in, for one thing. I wasn't really happy about leaving my family at the time as well. My dad said I was nuts even considering going to Featherstone because he hated Featherstone as a place. And he said the only team to play for is Castleford. So I went up there, I gave it a go. Could I become a professional rugby player? Yes, there's no doubt about it. I had the skills to be able to do it. I would have had to have lived in Yorkshire in order to be able to do it. And then looking back on it now, it was a no-brainer, really. At 30 years old, I'd be done. I wouldn't have made an awful lot of money. It's not like soccer where you make millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
It wasn't particularly well paid. And all I was getting when I was up there was expenses anyway.
Yeah.
But it was a good experience because it gave me the opportunity at that age to make the first career decision of my life.
Right. And also because you had to start this rugby team at school and get it going and get it up to this point of excellence from a pretty crappy beginning, that would have given you a kind of mentorship on the go in leadership. And your Welsh mentor himself must have helped you with that. But then by the time you find yourself later going into the forces, you already kind of know how to take a group of standard idiots and turn them into something.
Yeah.
And I think if you've been doing that since adolescence, it's probably something which you don't even notice in yourself probably by the time you're getting into your 20s, but that you can command. And by commanding, I don't mean just bossing people about to know about, I mean, actually organizing people and getting a job done that could be a difficult job, that could be a scary job.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, playing rugby at school, it wasn't just a case of, oh, I'm going to go play rugby at school on a Saturday afternoon and that's it. It was every day of my life. I mean, I lived and breathed for rugby. And at 13 years old, I started playing for the local rugby club as well, because Dave James, who was the gym teacher, played for the local rugby club and they had a junior team. So at 13 years old, I was playing rugby for the club on a Saturday afternoon and playing rugby for the school on Saturday morning, and we had practice twice a week. So I mean, you know, I think a lot of young people today, the problem that they have is they don't know what to do with themselves.
Mm.
And I hate bringing up computer games and things like that. There was no computer games when I was growing up. We didn't even have a television in the house. So it's not like I could watch television or do anything. You had to go out and do something. So rugby for me was really the way, I guess, of ignoring everything else that was going on and just doing something that I really enjoyed. I mean, like I said, we didn't have any money when I was growing up. We didn't
Yeah.
have a car. My dad had a motorbike, which eventually I inherited, but he couldn't ride the motorbike, not after he had his accident. My mum used to go and get her groceries on a bicycle, with a basket on the front. So,
Yeah.
but I think, yes, the leadership skills certainly started with the rugby team. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
I guess too, the thing with leadership is it's also responsibility, right? If you're the one who says, okay, I'm going to organize this team, I'm going to be the captain, I'm going to take a group of boys who are aggressive and chaotic, it's a lot of responsibility. You have to make it work, or you look like an idiot, and the
Yeah.
back will turn on you.
Yeah.
And so in a way where it's sort of do or die, isn't it? That you have to
Yes.
you have to take that risk, and that must have been quite intimidating. Equally going up to play rugby in the north like that, and anyone who's never played rugby, honestly, it was compulsory at school when I was a kid. And when a bloke like Paul is running at you, he's going to hit you like a car, and it's going to hurt, right? Or if I'm not a big guy, if I have to tackle Paul, I've got to hope that three of my mates are going to jump on him as well, or it's just not fair. I'm just sort of hanging onto his leg as he just keeps running up the pitch, kicking at my face, as he does it. There is quite a lot of fear involved, and when you end up on the bottom of the scrum, when it collapses, it doesn't matter actually how big you are, you can't breathe,
No.
and that panic that you get when you just have to sort of wait until you can breathe again. So I do wonder, one of the things which I think young men need is they do need a certain amount of risk, and they do need a certain amount of danger. We are supposed to go and hunt wildebeest with a spear, kind of thing. And do you feel that that's just less available these days? Because I feel that young men need it like they need oxygen.
Yes, it most definitely is unavailable, but I think society has had an awful lot to do with this, Rupert, because we mollycoddle kids now. There's no doubt about it. I'm not a firm believer. I don't think we should be going around beating our kids for every single thing that we do. But the trouble is they're getting wrapped in cotton wool. They're being protected. You get a situation where if anything happens at school, if somebody even turns around and yells at somebody, the parents can get called into the school and the child gets disciplined. It's easy for me in my 60s to turn around and say that we produced a soft generation, because my father used to say exactly the same thing about me when I was growing up, and everybody says that. But I think it's just got to the point now where there isn't enough things particularly for young men to do that really challenge them enough, and not just challenge them physically, but challenge them mentally and prepare them for the world. I mean, the world's a scary place, right?
Yes, it is.
The world is a scary place, believe you me. I mean, I'm still scared of some of the things that I see happen. I'm terrified when I go out and try driving on the roads at the moment. But there isn't enough things for, and I don't know, I agree with you 100%. There's a huge difference between young men and young women, the way that they interact. But young girls aren't really brought up to be scared of things, and but young men seem to have lost the whole sense of fear, and they don't want anything to do with it anymore. I think this is why they become insular, and they go to things like computer games because they don't want to actually face what's going on outside in the real
And
world.
interestingly, a lot of the computer games are showing the very things that in the old days they'd have actually been doing.
Exactly. That's exactly what they are.
So, all right, then tell us, you enter the forces, you go into the Navy.
Hmm.
Do you do that just because it's not what your dad wants you to do? Or do
To
you
a
do that?
certain no, to a certain extent,
And
yes.
what's his reaction?
Oh, he hated it. I don't think we talked for the first 2 years. I mean, I was going away for long periods of time. I mean, I'd be gone for 9 months. So, but my mother and I used to write letters every week. I mean, I've still got a big box full of letters that my mother wrote me in my early days in the Navy. I was very, very close to my mum. She was the one that used to get me up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do my paper round. She'd give me a cup of tea. She'd give me some toast.
Yeah.
I was very, very close to her. I never got a letter from my father at any point in time. I mean, he didn't really believe in writing anyway. There was no telephones or anything like that in
Yeah.
those days. There's no way of communicating other than through letters. But he
And he was
hated.
angry with you for going in the Navy.
He was, yeah, he was angry. He was angry. He was pretty well angry all the time. I think the only thing he really liked about me growing up was playing rugby.
Right.
And even then, when I made the decision not to go to Castleford and play rugby, he was annoyed at that. And then I decided I was going to go in the Navy and not in the army. And as I said, the first choice would have been the Air Force anyway. But
Right.
it was the Navy. I'll be quite honest with you. The Navy was an easy solution for me, and that's probably why I took that route. I know it's not necessarily the way that I have done things since then, but at that time, it was the easiest way for me to get out the house, go and see some of the world, which was the big thing because I didn't have to get posted in the UK or
Mm.
go to a training school or go to college for months. I went to a ship, I went out to Singapore, I went to a ship, and I was gone. I
Right.
started seeing the world from day one, literally, and that was the big appeal. I wanted to travel.
What did you do in the Navy? What was the job?
I started off as a weaponry officer. And then when I moved from the Royal Navy into the Merchant Navy, I had sufficient time in the Royal Navy and the qualifications to be able to go to Naval College and work my way up through the certification process so that I ended up with a captain's certificate. It would have taken a
So,
lot of years in the Royal Navy to get to that point, but in the
right.
Merchant Navy, it was quicker.
Okay, so that was going to be question A. Why did you choose the Merchant Navy? B, explain to, again, not everyone knows the British system, so if you can explain what the Merchant Navy is and talk us through what life was like with that. So first, why the change, then what is it, and then talk us through life.
As you know, if you followed any of my work, I'm an autism dad, and we have a whole career before this podcast in helping people with neurodivergence, either who are professionals in the field. Are you a therapist? Are you a caregiver? Are you a parent? Or are you somebody with neurodivergence? When my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism in 2004, I really didn't know what to do. So I reached out for mentorship, and I found it through an amazing adult autistic woman who's very famous, Dr. Temple Grandin. And she told me what to do. And it's been working so amazingly for the last 20 years that not only is my son basically independent, but we've helped countless thousands of others reach the same goal, working in schools, working at home, working in therapy settings. If you would like to learn this cutting edge neuroscience-backed approach, it's called Movement Method. You can learn it online. You can learn it very, very simply. It's almost laughably simple. The important thing is to begin. Let yourself be mentored as I was by Dr. Grandin and see what results can follow. Go to this website, newtrailslearning.com. Sign up as a gold member. Take the online Movement Method course. It's in 40 countries. Let us know how it goes for you. We really want to know. We really want to help people like me, people like you out there live their best life, to live free, ride free, see what happens.
Okay, well, the main reason for the change was money.
Okay.
You earn a lot more money in the Merchant Navy than you did in the Royal Navy. Also, it was to do with the ranking systems of the two different navies. Now, the Merchant Navy is the same as the US Merchant Marine. You could join the Merchant Marine and you can go to college as a cadet officer and work your way up through the different ranks in the Merchant Navy to become a captain. The Royal Navy pretty well works the same way, except the process is a lot slower. In order to become a captain in the Royal Navy, you'd probably have to have 25 or 30 years of service. You could get to captain in the Merchant Navy with 10 years of service. So it was a much, much quicker process. Merchant Navy paid a lot more money than the Royal Navy. And I was quite lucky in that I followed my my older cousin. Really was He was kind of like my mentor. He went into the Merchant Navy. He was 12 years older than me, and he was more like a big brother than a cousin. He went straight into the Merchant Navy. Fairly shortly, probably 6 or 7 years after he went in the Merchant Navy, he went into the oil and gas business. That's where the big money was. So I was able, when I went in the Merchant Navy, to do a couple of trips on big cargo ships, see a bit of the world doing that. And then I moved into the oil and gas business, and the oil and gas business, which was basically working on supply boats that ran supplies to the oil rigs. That's where the money really was. So, it was a transition from really just one naval service to another naval service, doing something different, not so much of the military regime, not so much of the yes sir, no sir, three bags full sir that you had in the Royal Navy, a lot more relaxed, and to be quite honest with you, a lot more fun.
Why is it more fun?
It's I'm not really the type of person that is a disciplinarian. I never really enjoyed the yes sir, no sir stuff that came with being in the Royal Navy. It was a more relaxed atmosphere, which I think just made it a little bit more fun. Also, the other thing as well is, when you go ashore, when you're in the Navy and you've been at sea a long time and you go ashore, you want to really go and enjoy yourself. In the Royal Navy, if you enjoyed yourself a little bit too much, there would be somebody there to put handcuffs on you and take you back to the ship.
Right.
In the Merchant Navy, you just had to avoid the local police, and that was a lot easier than avoiding the SPs. So that's
Yeah.
why it was more fun. And I went to some very, very remote, very uncivilized places when I was in the Merchant Navy. I worked
Like,
in Nigeria. Well, I worked in Nigeria for a number of years. I worked in Angola when the war was going on.
mm.
Worked East Africa, went all around India, all around South America, pretty well. I don't think there's very many coasts in the world I haven't actually touched at some point in time, but I spent a lot of time working in Africa, and you really see some terrible, terrible things there.
What did you see?
A lot of death,
Sort of death and why?
just dead bodies lying on the side of the road, poverty, starvation, shooting, robbery. It was
This
India,
was
Flint,
Nigeria specifically.
Nigeria, Angola was the same. Civil war was going on there.
Yeah.
Virtually the whole of West Africa, when I was there in the 80s, was just a mess.
But the ports that you
80s,
were landing in had a certain amount of security to them.
not really. No, they were pretty well open, and that was half the problem as well. I mean, we were working on the offshore supply boats. Pirating wasn't really an issue then. The pirating thing didn't
I was going to ask you
really
about
start.
piracy,
Yeah,
compared
it
to
didn't.
today off
It
Yemen, for
Oh,
example.
it's terrible today. I would not want to be having to deal with that. When we carried guns on board more for protection against robbers and things like that. Now they say, I mean, to deal with pirates now, they've got AK-47s, they've got automatic weapons. You don't really want to get involved in things like that. It was a lot simpler when I was doing things in West Africa, apart from Angola, and that is a different story, but because
Yeah,
that was
I had
that was
a,
the war zone. Yeah.
it was a war zone. Yeah.
We can talk about that a bit later on.
Okay.
But it was really just a case of protecting yourself. You had to shall we say, some of the training that I received when I was in the military helped me a lot in terms of personal protection. That I had a few instances in West Africa where I had to look after myself, and that helped a lot. But it was really just, if you went ashore in a group and you were armed. You just had to be armed. It's as simple as that. Not necessarily with a gun, but we used to take knives and clubs and things like that with us. And to a certain extent, it was just a way of life. Was I scared? No. Would it stop me going ashore? No. Would it stop me doing all the things I did? No, because I just wasn't scared. It's as simple as that.
Why do you think you weren't scared, given that it was scary?
That's a good, I think it all comes back to just the way that I prepared myself for life. There's nothing I can honestly say that really scares me. I mean, you know my background, Rupert. I'll happily toss myself out of an airplane, any point in time and hope the parachutes work. I don't know. I think that fear is something that you build up inside you, and if you let it overtake you, it can do you a lot of harm. And the simplest thing is push it to one side, just get on and deal with life. And that's what I've always done. I was bullied, believe it or not. I was bullied as a kid. One of the things we haven't touched on is when I was
Mm,
10 years old, I was riding my bicycle and I got hit by a car. Very, very lucky to survive. I have a scar that goes from here all the way up my face and around the back of
mm,
my ear. I had 140 stitches there. I had another scar down here. My head hit the curb. I wasn't wearing a helmet, smashed open the back of my head. As a result of that, I got bullied at school because the kids called me Scarface. The older kids, a lot of whom were some of the immigrants I talked about, I got bullied, and I had to learn to stand up for myself. My father's attitude was basically, if you're going to get into a fight, have something to help you win it. I got bullied. It happened 2 or 3 times. I ended up picking up a branch of a tree, hitting a couple of kids with it. They never touched me again.
mm.
And I'd be one of these people that, if threatened, I just lash out. I am a fighter. I always have been a fighter. I've certainly quietened down a little bit now, but you know me well enough to know that I won't put up with any crap from anybody. And
No, but
and so
interestingly, I do know that about you, but I also know you as actually a very tolerant man. With actually, you've got a short fuse in that you can be a bit grumpy. But one of the things I've always respected about you, Paul, is actually you don't throw your weight around. You could, because I think let's go into some more of your background in a minute. But I've never seen you be a bully. I've never seen you be cruel. I've never seen you use that power, misuse that power. So yes, I mean, I think if somebody threatens you or something like that, sure. I mean, I don't think I would want to do that. But oddly enough, I've never seen you misuse that aggression.
no, I don't. I don't. I use it to defend myself.
Mm,
It's just a defensive reaction.
mm,
And I mean, anybody in the same situation, you can do two things. You can run or you can stand and fight. And I've run at times, and I can't run very
Sometimes it's
fast.
very much the right thing to do.
Sometimes it is definitely the right thing to do. Other times, other times it's stand up and fight. And sometimes you don't have a need to fight. You just have to stand up for yourself. It's as simple as
Yes.
that. But again, you asked me, why am I not afraid of anything? I mean, I guess I may well find something I'm afraid of. Like I said, the one thing terrifies me at the moment is driving on the roads, because there's so many idiots out there, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. And I think there's more chance of dying in a car wreck than anything else. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not, you know, I don't have to deal with wild animals. I don't have to deal with war anymore. There's really no fighting, no war or anything like that I would get involved in. So the most dangerous thing I do is go out and drive. I ride a motorbike. I was on the motorbike yesterday.
That
I
is
ride a
dangerous.
motorbike. But I've ridden a bike since I was 10, 11 years old. You
Mm.
know, only had a couple of spills. Fortunately, touch wood, I've never seriously hurt myself. But you've got to be, you have to ride defensively.
Yes,
And
you
it's
do.
just like everything else, isn't it? You got to be defensive.
Yeah.
You just got to be prepared to look after yourself. That's really what it comes down to.
So you were talking about war there. So let's talk about that. So how do you end up going from the merchant navy back into the forces and end up in special forces? What's the
Okay.
trajectory there?
Well, when I was in the Royal Navy, I was given the opportunity to move sideways into the Royal Marine Commandos, which is just like the American Marines. The Marines are part of the US Navy. So the Royal Marine Commandos are actually technically not part of the British Army. They're more part of the British Navy. I was interested in special forces and special forces training because of what my father went through. And so when an opportunity came for me to step sideways, if you like, into the RMC, I took that opportunity. And as a result of that, I ended up going to Special Forces selection, which I failed miserably the first time, and then going through it again a second time, and
I
I
didn't know they
managed to.
gave you a second chance. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
they do. They do. Yes, you
Uh,
can go back again.
uh.
And I ended up going back and basically getting through that. So that was how I ended up getting through. And I just carried that training and that responsibility through with some of the other stuff that I got involved in later on.
So, okay. So what did you get involved in later on? You ended up in the SAS, I know. Tell us what you want to tell us.
I can't really say too much about anything that happened during that period, to be quite honest with you, and I'd really rather not.
Mm,
However, one of the interesting things that did happen later on, when I was in the oil and gas business, I was working in Angola when the war was actually on, the civil war was going on. And through some contacts that I had that I met down there, there was an opportunity to actually do some work for the Angolan government. So basically, what the situation in Angola was that you had two different political parties, as quite often happens with a civil war, and you had one ruling party, which was MPLA, and there was another party which was UNITA. And the civil war was really, UNITA was being funded by the Russians, MPLA was being funded, if you like, by the West, by non-Russians. And the Russian funding got to the point where they were starting to get tooled up with some very, very serious equipment. And the government needed some help, if you like, suppressing some of the things that were going on, particularly fairly close to Luanda, which was the capital of Angola. So, as a result of some of the associations that I had, I was able to step to one side of the oil and gas work that I was actually doing because I was working down there as a consultant for Sonangol, which is a national oil company of Angola. So, I got to meet some very high people up in the government, including the president of the country at the time, and ended up, if you like, helping them with some of the military issues that they had. It was really more protecting the oil and gas assets that they had that were being threatened by the, shall we say, the rebel forces. And there were South African mercenaries that were actually working there, ex-special forces guys from South Africa that were working in Angola all the time. I had some association with them, not working I didn't work as a mercenary per se, but I was associated with, shall we say, some of the strategic decisions that were made in order to be able to help protect Luanda.
and what years are we talking there, and how long did that go on for?
Well, I mean, my involvement was from 1992 to 1996, primarily 1994.
Okay.
I think the Civil War went on, I think, for almost 20 years, Rupert, to be
Yeah,
quite
it did.
honest with you.
It did.
From
I remember
it
I was
went
in
on for
Angola
a long,
and
long, long time.
30
There
years,
was a
I think.
lot, yeah, I think it was. There was a lot of very, very heavy fighting around Luanda and
Mm,
Soyo during the 90s, and most,
mm,
most of the rest of the
mm.
problem was more inland. But when it got to the coast and it started to threaten the oil and gas business, that's when the government realized that they really needed to do something about it. So it was during that period.
And you had been deployed within the British forces as well. I know you don't want to go too much into it, but you had been deployed in the Falklands, correct? And
Yeah, that's
then,
correct.
yeah, and that was special forces. So you'd taken that experience over.
Absolutely. Yes.
You know, Angola's a scary place, or at least it certainly was. I remember staring down a barrel of a child soldier's automatic there
Mm.
with a, with had a traveling companion who was a German girl who we didn't realize at the time was bipolar, and she later sent me 10 years later sent me an apology letter. She almost got me killed like two, three times, and it was just her and a friend. I mean, there was nothing going on with us. We were just travelers. I was writing a guidebook actually and being a journalist, and I just wanted people from youth hostels to split costs with. And we ended up crossing the border into Angola briefly, and she got verbally aggressive with the wrong people. And I was like, what are you doing? You're going to get us killed. You're going to get us killed. You're like, you really are going to get us killed. You've got to stop. And you know how that thing is. You're looking down the barrel of somebody who's 15 pointing that gun at you. And you know that whatever decision they're making is not going to be rational.
That's actually, a good point. Something very, very similar happened to me. Funnily enough, not in Angola or Nigeria. It was actually in Mozambique, but that was during the Civil War there.
Yeah, that was also nice.
Where they were arming, a lot of the kids did have automatic weapons, and those were the ones that you really did have to be worried about.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about it. The regular soldiers, to a certain extent, weren't so bad. The kids just really didn't know what they were doing. They had no training, and they just saw, especially if you were being aggressive with them, you are lucky you didn't get shot.
Yeah, well, I did just a lot of apologizing, and you talk about having no fear. I had a lot of fear. I was hacking myself, because yeah. But yeah, as you say, the way through is sometimes there are ways to stand up for yourself, and sometimes it's actually to talk your way through. And in that case, it was to sort of appeal to somebody's sense of reason and humanity. Okay, so you're in the Merchant Navy. You're not a mercenary in Angola. At what point do you start aviating? I presume with jumping out of airplanes, that must have started with special forces.
Yeah, I did do some helicopter flying when I was in the military. Didn't get into it too seriously, but the aviating really just simply came about as a result of buying a skydiving business and inheriting an airplane. It came with an airplane. We had a pilot.
Okay.
And one of the things that I think Jen and I realized pretty quickly, and we really knew this just from our experience.
Jen being your wife, yeah.
Jen being my wife, yeah. Through our experience at other drop zones, is if the pilot gets sick, you don't do any business. Most drop zones can't afford to hire more than one pilot. So if literally, if the pilot does get sick, if he gets a cold, he can't fly, and then the business is shut down. So when we bought the business, we had a pilot that, if you like, that was working for the business. He told us fairly quickly he was looking to move into the airlines, because a lot of the time skydiving pilots use it to build hours,
right?
So they can then go and fly for the airlines. He told us that he was looking to go to the airlines, so we needed to find another pilot. We found another pilot, luckily, that stayed with us for almost 10 years. But it did make us realize that while it's fairly easy to hire skydiving instructors, finding pilots is hard, and keeping pilots is hard. So Jan and I decided to have flying lessons. We took flying lessons. We started in 2005. We both got a private pilot's license within about a year, 9 months, I think it was. Bought ourselves a little Cessna airplane because we were living in Houston, and the business we owned was a 2-hour drive away, but it was only a half an hour flight. So we bought a little airplane, and then we could fly out there for the weekends with the kids. My kids were growing up at the time. I decided that rather than just stop at private pilot's license, I'd get my instrument rating, I'd get my multi-engine rating, I'd get my commercial. So basically I had all of the different ratings that I need to fly any of the airplanes we were ever likely to use in the skydiving business. And I went through all of those over the next year or so, got all those ratings. And then as soon as I...
so quick? Doesn't it take longer normally to get?
No, I was flying almost every day, having lessons.
Okay.
Because we were running a business, and it was important that I got the ratings. The cost of, it's cost prohibitive for most people as well to do all of that because of the cost of the instruction. But I was fortunate in that the business was able to help with the cost. And I would go and have a flying lesson at 7 o'clock in the morning, finish at 9 o'clock, go to the office.
Right.
Work in the office till 7, 8 o'clock at night, come home, go repeat the same thing. And then, like I said, weekends we'd be going out to a skydiving business. So it was 7 days a week working, and very, very long hours as well. That's how we got into flying. That's how both Jen and I got into flying. We still fly today. We still own a little airplane that we fly, even though we sold the skydiving business a number of years ago. We owned a small jet for a period of time. I mean, you've flown with us.
I have. It's my experience of flying a private jet. I'm very, very,
Yeah.
very grateful.
Yeah. Yeah, we've done a lot of stuff. And I mean, as I get older now, I'm almost 70 now. We sold the jet because once you hit 70, it's pretty difficult to get insurance to fly small private jets. So we're just scaling things down. But that's how we got into the aviation side. And I must say, I love it. I always wanted to join the Royal Air Force. I think I said that very, very early on because I'd never flown at the time, but I just thought it looked like a lot of fun to do. And it is a lot of fun. And I really, really enjoy it. So it's one of the things I think that probably motorcycling and flying, I still get the most enjoyment out of pretty much everything we do. We still enjoy jumping as well, just don't jump as much as we could do.
So, then you go from the merchant navy into the oil and gas business, and you do well. And
so let's talk about that, okay?
Yeah.
The same thing. It's the same thing again. I wanted basically to get to the point where I was captaining my own ship. That was my target. And when I went in the Navy, I can remember way, way before I joined the Navy, there was a guy that was playing at my rugby club. I was probably 14 years old, 14 or 15. He was a captain in the Merchant Navy. And he was earning, and I remember this like it was yesterday, he was earning £5,000 a year. That was £100 a week. That was a huge amount of money.
What year was that? Would that have been
that would have been in, let me think, 69, 70.
Oh, yeah, that would have been a lot of money. Yeah.
It was a lot of money. I was earning 10 shillings a week delivering newspapers. He was earning £100 a week as a captain. So ultimately, my target was to get to be captain because I thought, well, I've not had any money growing up, but I'll be doing fairly well because he drove a nice sports car. I think he had an E-type Jag and he seemed to live very comfortably. So that was always really my target, was to become a captain. Once I transitioned into the Merchant Navy, 1984, I went to college for 6 months and I passed my captain's license test. So from 1984, I had a license to captain any ship of any size anywhere in the world. And at the time, the company that I was working for, which was an American offshore company, were desperately short of captains. And I got an opportunity to move from first officer to captain, working on the oil rig supply boats. So I took that opportunity. And then I ended up moving from West Africa into the North Sea. So I was captain of supply boats working the North Sea in some of the most horrendous weather you can
imagine.
Possibly imagine. And I did that until about 1990. But in the interim period of time, with a couple of other guys in Aberdeen, we started our own company, a marine consultancy company. And what we were doing was we were providing tow masters to move oil rigs around the North Sea. So I moved from being captain of a ship. I worked as captain on the oil rigs in the Middle East for a couple of years. Then I went back to the North Sea, working for my own company with these two other gentlemen. And we set the company up, and we've become very, very successful at renting our services out to move oil rigs around, to the point where we ended up having to start hiring people to work for us. So then the company started to grow. I think the last job I did when I was actually working on the oil rig, the big tugs, because I was moving oil rigs around as a tow master at the time, was probably 1990. And then there was an opportunity shortly thereafter to go and work for a small Canadian oil company as a marine superintendent. So, and this was in Aberdeen. So I'm still working. I'm managing director of my own consultancy company. They needed a marine superintendent. So we literally contracted my services to this small Canadian company as a marine superintendent. And that's how I ended up. I did some work in the North Sea, installing platforms in the North Sea, oil rig platforms for them. And they also had a license in Angola. And that's how I ended up in Angola, working for them down in Angola, meeting the government officials from Senegal and doing that sort of stuff. So I ran that company as managing director for 13 years until 1998, when I ended up, as a result of meeting some guys, funnily enough, in Angola, getting an opportunity to come to Houston. And I'd been in Aberdeen for 8 years at that time. I wanted to take the company international. My two partners did not want to go international. They wanted to stay in the UK. So we started to come to a point where we were going to split. The opportunity came up for me to go to Houston. So I ended up going to Houston as a consultant, working for this Singaporean-based company to set up the business development office for them. And that was really an opportunity for me to just simply say, okay, I like it here. I'm going to stay here. They're going to pay me well. I'll leave the UK consultancy company. I'll just step back, keep my shares in the company, but not have anything to do with the day-to-day running. That's how I ended up in the US.
Right. So you're talking about moving oil platforms around, and as if that's an easy thing to do in the North Sea.
Yeah.
As you said, I've seen what the weather can be. You talk about not being afraid. You must have been afraid sometimes in those storms that the ship might go down. Not?
I was like that. There was a couple of opportunities where I never thought I'd ever see weather worse than that, and then there was weather worse than that. I was never bothered about a ship going down. And one of the things I should probably point out is that, remember I told you I had an older cousin who was 12 years older than me. I also had another cousin that was 4 years older than me, Neil. He was actually on an offshore supply boat that did go down in the Mediterranean, and he was lost at sea.
Mm.
The ship just disappeared.
Wow.
And that was in the Mediterranean.
Wow. Well, you don't expect to see that kind of weather.
And I'd been in the Navy, I think, 2 years when that happened. And, you know, it really brought it home with the vulnerability. Now, when I was on my own ship as captain working in the North Sea, we went out in some horrendous weather. I remember there was one Christmas where the storms were really, really bad. And I was flown out by helicopter to a rig which had broken a couple of his moorings to try to be able to get some tugs attached to the rig so we could actually pull it away from a platform that it was going to end up drifting towards. That was some of the worst weather that I ever saw. When I was captain on a ship myself, we went out in Force 10 a couple of times from Aberdeen. I was never bothered about the ship going down. Could it have happened? Yes. But I guess that I felt that my superior seamanship skills were able to deal with anything that the weather threw at us at the time. And again, I think I was very, very lucky. We never got into a serious situation. But I mean, there was a lot of really, really nasty things happened out there. I'll tell you what, one time I was a bit twitchy. One of the things that I had to do was move jack-up rigs alongside platforms. And when you're moving a jack-up rig alongside a platform, a jack-up rig basically is an oil rig. They work in relatively shallow water up to about 150, 200 feet. They go deeper now, but in those days, 150, 200 feet. And it's like, it's a triangular shaped rig that has 3 legs. It floats with the legs jacked up, and then you put it to wherever you want it to go. And there's normally 3 tugs attached, one at each corner because it's a triangle. And you move it where you want to go with the tugs, and then you lower the legs down. The legs hit the seabed, and they raise the rig up off the sea. It literally comes up, so you have a gap between the sea and the bottom of the rig. It's called the air gap. Now, one of the things we had to do in the southern part of the North Sea was to actually move these jack-up rigs alongside a fixed platform. So now you've got something that is attached to the seabed that has accommodation on top, and it's got wells going through it, and the jack-up rig has to go right up close to that. You jack it up. It has a drilling deck that then cantilevers over the top of the platform so they can get the drilling equipment down the well. You have to move those rigs 4 to 6 feet away from the legs of the fixed platform. So the accuracy, the way that we do this is a combination of using anchors and tugs, but you are literally moving the rig 6 inches at a time. So I'm giving instructions to one of the tugs to pull 6 inches in on a tow line, another one pull 6 inches in here. That is I won't say it's scary, it's nerve-wracking, because there's no room for error. Absolutely no. And the way that we used to tell if we were in the right place is quite funny. We have what we called surveyors on board, and the surveyors were technical guys, okay? We didn't have sat nav or anything like that. So in order to tell whether or not we were in the right place on the platform, because you had to get in exactly the right place, we'd get 2 aluminium ladders, stick them out the back of the rig with a scaffolding pole going across and a couple of paint marks. And when that scaffolding pole and the paint marks touched the legs of the platform, we knew we were in the right place. That's how
Okay.
technical. That's how
And
technical.
what would happen if you got it wrong?
You'd end up hitting the rig would hit the platform, and that was really, really bad.
Because
Because if you have make contact with the platform or the rig, you can't do anything. You have to pull away. You then have to fly a surveyor out to survey the rig to make sure it doesn't have any damage. You have to get divers to do NDT on the platform to make sure you haven't damaged the integrity of the platform. Because even if you say, "Oh, we just kissed it, we just touched it," doesn't matter. Game is off. Rig gets pulled away. Oil company that you're working for get really angry because you've now got a rig that's costing them $100,000 a day and it's not doing anything because you've screwed up.
okay, and you're doing this in rough weather.
Yeah, rough weather.
How do you do it? How do you do it? How do you get that level of accuracy in rough weather when the waves are just tossing you about?
Well, I mean, in the southern North Sea, the current is a major issue as well. So you have to wait for what they call slack water, which occurs every 6 hours. And then there is a point with the weather where you just say, no, we can't do it.
Okay.
But, so there's a maximum wave height, because obviously if you are moving up and down and you're surging back and forward, you've got to be really, really careful with what you're doing. So you do get to the point where if the weather's really bad, you just have to stop.
Okay.
And it's the same in the northern North Sea when you're moving the semi-submersible rigs around that float and have anchors. You get to the point where when the waves get beyond a certain height, you just have to stop, hold position, and wait for the weather to calm down a bit.
Okay. So yeah, we're back to the subject of fear, and you said, it's nerve-wracking. That's another whole thing with fear is that, well, there's fear for your own personal safety, but then there's also fear
of damage.
Well, and fear of effing
Screwing up.
Yeah.
Screwing
Fear,
up. Yeah.
What it comes down to is responsibility. Like
Yeah.
these types of job that you're talking about, they're very difficult. And you've got to manage these natural conditions. You've got to manage groups of people who are, doing this stuff, and there's going to naturally be human error in there, not to mention the weather, So do you think that, that's a lot of pressure to handle?
Mm.
Do you think that it really, if you look at where were the skills that you built to be able to handle that sort of pressure, that you built them sort of in the paper rounds, age 10?
Yes.
Is that where it all began?
Standing up for yourself. And I mean, it's really just, if you're going to take on a job that has that sort of level of responsibility, you have got to have a huge amount of confidence in yourself.
Mm.
And, as I said, one of the things that we were doing was we were hiring people to work as tow masters. Well, you don't just pull these guys off the street.
No.
They have got to be trained. So every single one of the people that we hired was a qualified captain. They all had captain's licenses. Most of them had worked as captain on supply boats or on big tugs. They knew what moving oil rigs around was all about, but you still had to train them. So if you like, because I had my own company, I became a tow master instructor per se. And in order to be able to do that type of job with a very, very high level of responsibility, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and potential damage, not necessarily lives at stake because it wasn't that type of a job. But you've got to have a lot of confidence in yourself. And you've got to not be afraid of what you're doing in order to be able to do it successfully. And and you've also got to have the patience and the communication skills to be able to pass that on to somebody when you're training them. That the self-confidence definitely came. It started with me having to go out at 5 o'clock in the morning in the UK in the winter when it was dark on my bicycle and go and deliver newspapers. And I was delivering newspapers in the snow and in the rain, and actually not having, that was probably the most fearful thing, as a 10-year-old, actually going out in the dark on a bicycle and having to go onto a housing estate and walk up people's drives with dogs barking and deliver newspapers. And it built up a certain amount of self-confidence, almost to the point where you think, screw this, I mean, I can do this, I can do pretty much anything. And one of the things I will say to you is I've never been, how can I put this? There hasn't been a situation where somebody's asked me if I could do something where I've said no. I might have said I have to think about it, and I've done that a lot. But in most cases, if somebody's asked me to do something, if I haven't got the skills to do it, I can figure out how to do it because I'm very good at figuring things out. But if it's just something that's completely off the wall, then I would simply say, I'll think about it, which just really means, no, I probably won't do it, but I'm going to think about it because I like to be able to process things. And that really does come down. There's no doubt about it. Having that paper round and having to go out to work at such an early age was a great character builder. There's no doubt about that. And I did that every day for 6 years. I stopped my paper round the day I left the UK to join the Navy.
As you may know, if you've been following my work, we are also horsey folk here. And we have been training horses for many, many years in the manner of the old classical dressage masters. This is something which is often very confusing for people. We shine a light on that murky, difficult stuff and make it crystal clear. If you'd like to learn to train your horse in the manner of the old masters and really have fun and joy for you and your equine, go to our website, heliosharmony.com, sign up as a premium member and begin to take the Helios Harmony course, which will take you from 0 to the piaffe, where the horse is dancing on the spot, in hand, on the ground. And then from there, you can develop out to anywhere you want to. heliosharmony.com to unlock the secrets of the old masters.
Wow. I'm also thinking about you talked about communication skills, and that's important too, because it's not enough to be big and tough or even competent.
No.
If you're going to manage teams, you can't be going around scaring your team, because then there's no job. Rather the opposite, they've got to feel that the big scary guy has their back. Do you think that the communication skills came with having to build that rugby team?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because I didn't learn any communication skills from being at home with my
Doesn't sound
parents.
like it.
No. I mean,
although your mum sounds very warm.
My mum
very
was
warm.
really, really great. She was a great help to me, but we weren't the sort of family that we sat around in the evening, if you like, drinking tea and chatting about what we did during the day. That didn't happen. It was being at school, playing rugby with the team, with the lads. They were, they were the closest group that we had, as any sports team is, really. And then taking those communication skills. I mean, I was assessed very, very early on after I joined the Navy as having natural leadership qualities, because I was able to guide people and I was able to communicate with people. So I was actually given the opportunity to accelerate through the whole Navy process very, very quickly, because I had that ability to be able to talk to people, to be able to communicate and be able to get over what I was trying to communicate quickly.
Right. So let's dial back to where we began. We have this epidemic of young men who can't get out of the basement, who are maybe playing video games that simulate some of the adventures that you might have actually had in real life, and are lacking self-confidence on a level that is disabling. do we do about this?
That's a $10 million question, isn't it? 10-year-old kids nowadays can't go out and deliver papers.
No,
Yes,
no, they
yes,
can't. It's a different world.
you just can't do it. I mean, when my kids were growing up, I was, to be quite honest with you, quite scared of them even just going and riding their bicycles in
In
our
Houston,
subdivision,
sure.
in Houston, it's as simple as that. But I think what you've got to do is, I think it really comes down to, you've got to take an interest in something that community is doing.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that can be through a club,
Mm.
YMCA. I again, it's a Christian association. I think a lot of people, certainly where I live, I mean, I live in Texas, in what they call the Bible Belt. I'm not a religious person myself, but I know that the young lads I've met here that do extremely well for themselves, they are Christians. And the religious side of things over here, they go to church, which is a club in effect. They communicate with other people. And I'm talking about a lot of the young guys around here that grow up on farms or on ranches and do things like that. They get themselves out. They don't get the opportunity to sit around watching television or playing computer games because they're out doing stuff. They are doing
exactly. And I mean, look, the life that we lead, Paul, it's not representative anymore. I mean,
no,
my kids
no.
also are out on the farm working with horses and doing stuff, and I don't force them to do it, but there's just stuff to do. So, and it's kind of interesting to do. So why wouldn't you? But if you are living in, as you said, you were scared when your kids were going out in a subdivision in Houston, and that's of course where most people are, is in those types of suburban environments, and kids are not allowed to work anymore. It's also not terrible. It is less safe now than it used to be. But I like what you said about involvement in community, because
Yeah.
if you haven't got a farm or a ranch to be part of, well, that just doesn't exist for you. But if you're growing up in let's say you're on a housing estate today let's dial it back to where you were as a boy. You're in a housing estate, outskirts of London. What's around you? There's going to be, on the bad side, there's going to be drugs, there's going to be gang stuff, but that to some degree was always there. On the positive side, there's going to be kids who are doing creative things like music, perhaps sport, other things like that. But I think I like that you put your finger on something with community involvement and service. Most people are not going to be in a church environment, but that's a good place to start from, I think. You're now in this housing estate today in 2025 as a father of a 10-year-old boy. What do you do?
I think what I'd want to try to do is, obviously, school is community. And not only is school community, but your neighbors are community as well. And certainly when my kids were growing up, and this wasn't that long ago, what was important was actually finding out what the other kids in the neighborhood are doing, where are they going, where are they hanging out, are they at the tennis courts, are they at the swimming pool? There are places where they're going to go, and they're going to, if you like, group together. And I don't mean in gangs or anything like that.
Yeah.
But just to do,
following
even
their interests, basically.
skateboarding, you've got to get, I just think you've got to get the kids out the houses.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Which means you've got to do it with them.
You've got to go do it with them. So, I mean, over here, when my kids were growing up, when my son was growing up, we did T-ball, we did baseball, we do all, I know it's sports again, but it's very sport orientated over here. And that's what you got to remember. But, friends that we have now, they have girls that are in gymnastics, that are in swim clubs. Most of the things are some form of sport orientated. But I mean, is there anything wrong with kids getting involved in sport? I mean, I got involved in sport. You can't work, or you can work, but you can't work till you're 13 or 14 or even older than that. But working doesn't really seem to be the important thing. I think it's community activities, and community activities can be sports.
Yeah.
They could be stamp collecting. They could be.
Well, I mean, I think that's the thing. I
Oh,
mean, so in my case,
yeah.
as the kind of nerd I was, obviously I was riding, right? But I'm a huge nature nerd. So for me, it would have been
Yeah.
bird watching, plant identification, animal watching. And then from there, you get into hiking, you get into mountaineering, you get into
Exactly. And that's one of the things I
canoeing.
love now. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd rather be outside than sitting here at the moment. I'd rather be riding my tractor around, riding my ATV, going and
Right.
mowing grass, walking with my dogs.
Yes.
You know, and that's another thing that we used to do
But
as
you
well.
did this with your kids.
I did it with my kids. Yeah, we used to go to the park. We used to walk the dogs on a regular basis, teach them things to do with nature.
Mm,
The problem we have right now, Rupert, is that you've got kids that are growing up with parents that almost grew up exactly the same way that they're growing up. Because you
mm,
had computer games starting in the 90s. They
mm,
grew up with computer games. They're now having kids. So if the parents don't know to go out themselves and get things done and want to
mm.
stay in the house and want to watch television, the kids are going to grow up exactly the same way. So it's really should we be dealing with this from the point of view of what should the kids be doing, or should we try to educate the parents in what they should be doing?
I
That's the
guess,
other.
to as you say, like when I was a kid, when you were a kid, even like when I was in the country in England growing up, that not everyone had a car by any means.
We
Mm,
didn't have one.
no. And I'm talking about also people that live like out on farms didn't
Yeah.
necessarily have cars. They'd walk to the top of their driveway, walk to the village, get a bus, or take a bicycle or whatever.
Hmm.
A lot of places didn't have electricity even growing up, I remember, on remote farms. And then, of course, that all changed somewhere in the 80s. But crucially, I think that there was a lot of movement. You had to move, right? You didn't have an option if you wanted to move yourself from one place to another to not do it with your body.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is difficult if you grow up in a subdivision that has no public transport and the only option is cars. You might be able to ride your bicycle around, the cul-de-sacs or whatever. But as you say, I guess then you do have things like skateboarding, you do have things like, but it's very difficult not to end up indoors on a computer.
Yeah.
And it's marketed at you. And as you say, with parents who are maybe, two-job parents or single parent, with more than one kid. But I think you did put your finger on it when you talked about community. So the way I would think about community is tribe. And
Hmm.
as you know, I spent a lot of time in Africa living with tribes, and my own family is very tribal. I grew up with a lot of cousins, Southern Africans, and there were always just a procession of cousins coming through the house from everywhere. It was considered normal that we'd all end up at each other's places at whenever, and you could kind of stay as long as you wanted. It was all right. You had to muck in, but everyone was always welcome everywhere. That level of and so to some degree we were all in service to each other, right? I think I wonder if we've lost the habit of that. So that, as you say, yeah, sometimes church, but and then you moved. You didn't have that growing up, but when you got to say Houston with your kids, you saw the value of it. Why did you see the value of it when you didn't have it growing up? And why did you know that that was something you had to give them?
Well, I think to be quite honest with you, it was really a case of what are the community doing? So, when we first moved over here and started to make contact with local people, and they had kids in the subdivision that we lived in, it's like, well, what are the kids doing? Oh, they're going down the road and they're playing t-ball, they're playing baseball. They're right next to where the house was, there was a little sports field there. And so, we went down there to see what was going on. Knew nothing about baseball, t-ball, or any of the sports whatsoever. Jack, my son, was 6 at the time when we moved to the US. My daughter wasn't even born. She was born a couple of years after I moved over here. So, I had a 6-year-old that would have ended up being stuck in the house all the time if I didn't do something with him. And I was working. I mean, I had a very, very hot, busy, high level job, but I had to do something. So, we would talk to the neighbors. The neighbors had kids, find out what the kids were doing. we use the community, if you like, to figure out what to do with the kids. And that's what we did all the time. So your tribe really, it's almost like it was a small subdivision that we lived in. There was probably only about 20, 25 houses, but that was our community.
Yeah.
And that's plus the fact, that when I would go to work, as I built the business up in Houston and started to hire people, I'd go to their houses, talk to their families. What do you do? Blah, 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 blah. Where do you do things? I needed to learn how the American system worked as well. You know this because you came over here and lived over here for a number of years. It's
Yeah.
very different from living in Europe.
Yes, it is.
But we've now got to the point, 20 years later, where you're absolutely right. There is no public transport. There is no way of getting around other than being driven by your parents. So as
Yeah.
a kid, all you do you get put in a car, you get taken somewhere,
Yeah.
you go and do that activity, you
Yeah.
go back home.
Yeah.
And how much of those activities are related to the actual community that you live in and how much are related to the school is difficult to say. It's probably more school orientated. In other words, whatever the school kids do, that's what you do. But the kids are being transported from one place to another.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have noticed is and I don't know what it's like in Europe, but it's getting very, very bad over here, is what I call self-gratification. People are growing up with an attitude that the world owes them something, community owes them something, and they expect to get that out of the community without really putting an awful lot back into it again. It's almost like it's a bit of selfishness to a certain extent. I've always looked at life as you get out of it whatever you put in. So you've got to be prepared to put something into life in order to be able to get something out. And unfortunately, I think kids today, particularly certainly where I live in the US, expect everything to be handed to them on a plate.
I mean, I think every older generation has always said this about every younger generation forever.
I'm sure they have.
I mean, you remember your dad would have moaned at you about that, and my dad and granddad moaned at me about that, But I think perhaps each generation is right in that what they observe is young people trying to figure it out. And while they're in that figuring out process, they get stuff wrong, and that annoys the older generation. But I do think it's more acute now in terms of, like, say, for example, here in Germany, where I am, my kids can take a bicycle and ride to the store. They can walk to the store. They can go and figure out how to do their own shopping. And they're 10 and 8, and they can do that. They can do that safely here. They can walk to their grandparents' house. This is all very normal, right? They can go down to the creek and play, and you're not paranoid about their safety in the way that one would be in the USA. I wouldn't probably let them do it in the USA unless we were in a very, very rural area and kind of had control of the land and the environment. And it is still safer here. And then you do have a lot of what are called vereins here, which are clubs. So, we're part of a Reitverein, a riding club, which means that if we all put our money in, we all have access to these facilities like arenas and jumps and things like that we wouldn't be able to put in ourselves privately, but collectively we can. But we have to do a certain number of work hours as well as putting in dues. So the kids have to show up and there's work hours for kids in the Verein. It's not just for the parents. And then there's NABU, which is our local nature conservation Verein, and we have to go out and into the orchards around here and clean out the owl boxes, get up a ladder, do that, scoop out the shit. But there's interesting stuff in there. And then you find dormice and you find, and there is this, I think you nailed it with community. It's there. People say it's not as good as it was. You talk to the old generation, they say it's been eroded, but it's still much stronger, I think. And there's a very good public transport. So, we're out here, for example, Rowan, my 23-year-old son, who very well, who's autistic. When he's in Texas, he has to drive everywhere, and thank God he can drive. But here, he takes the trains all over, and he stays in youth hostels, and
Right.
explores different cities in Europe, and he can do that because there is still kind of a system. But you when you were a kid, you didn't have that community involvement. You had to make it through that rugby team, right? You had to
Mm.
manufacture it. What would have happened to you if you hadn't done that?
Oh, I'll be quite honest with you. I think I would have ended up being a lot more insular and isolated
Okay.
than I was. I mean, the community I went, my high school had 600 kids, which is nothing compared to what you have today. And as you worked your way up through the years in the school, you almost got to know everybody in the school. I wouldn't say you knew everybody, but you got it. It really was being part of the community. Now, it didn't matter whether you played a sport; you could be part of the community by supporting one of the teams or just hanging out with the guys that played in the teams. If I hadn't have had anything to do with rugby, this I was involved in a lot of stuff at school as far as sports are concerned because I was a very sporty person. Now, if I wasn't a sporty person or for whatever reason I couldn't do the sport, I think I would have been a very, very insular type of person because I think that's what made me, I'm quite gregarious. I'm very outgoing. I'll talk
Mm,
to anybody. You know that.
mm,
That's part of my character that really built up through those years.
mm.
Because prior to going to at 10 years old, so I want to backtrack a little bit, okay? So when my father got really, really sick and the building business started to collapse in London, I was 6, 7 years old. And we couldn't afford to live in the townhouse in London. So my mother, who had some contacts, shall we say, with the theatre people in London, I'm not going to mention any names, but she was good friends with a couple of very famous actresses. One of the actresses had an old cottage out in the Hertfordshire countryside that had no electricity, it had no running water, just as you were talking about, and it needed work doing to it. Well, my dad was able to do some work. He couldn't do a lot of heavy work, but he was able to do some work. We moved into that cottage and spent 3 years there.
Okay.
But I went to a local school that had 20 kids in it.
Right.
So my junior school
Village
years were in the
school. Right. Yeah.
village school,
Yeah.
20 kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Tribe.
so I tribe,
Yeah.
but I spent this little cottage was in the middle of nowhere with
Yeah.
fields all round, country
Mm,
all round. I was surrounded by nature, but it was tribe. So when we then moved into the council house in Hoddesdon, which was a lot more urban, shall we say, than rural, that's when I started to get bullied because I didn't know anybody there. There was no
mm,
tribe. I'd lost it all completely. And I was a bit of a loner. I mean, I really, really was. It was just me and my sister living there. My mum and dad didn't know anybody. They couldn't go out. They couldn't do anything. There was no community whatsoever. So I became, I definitely did become a loner because I can remember going out. What do I want to do? Well, I'm going to go get some bicycle parts and build myself a bicycle because I couldn't afford to buy one. So I ended up building a bicycle and then I started to get round. But then I went into the high school, the secondary school, and all of a sudden I was able to build my own community there. And that's when I started to be more outgoing. So it's very, very easy not you've got to work on those skills. I think it doesn't come naturally and it doesn't come
Yeah,
naturally.
I think you're right. I'm sort of thinking back to some of my own because, as you know, I'm also very gregarious, but I wasn't always.
Yeah,
And everyone's had the experience of being bullied, and everyone's had that, and has
yeah,
had to deal with it, right? And there was also, I think, yeah, a crucial period of learning how to build community through my love of horses. And
mm,
then, of course, you find other people that have that, and you share that. With us, it was the local hunt because you didn't
right,
need money to be in the hunt. You just had to be part of the pony club,
right,
and so the pony club let you hunt for free and subsidized everything to get people onto that track. And it was good because it ended up being kind of a career track for me alongside everything else I've done. But it wasn't always like that, and I wasn't terribly well accepted because I was a London boy, not fully
yeah,
English, like in Leicester,
yeah,
coming up
yeah,
through that, and you had to kind of find your way. Do you think that if the computer games and that whole thing had been around when you were a kid on that estate, would you have fallen into that trap, do you think?
Quite possibly. I can't say no
Yeah.
because, it's one of these things. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier on, I don't sit around watching television or reading newspapers. I gave up reading newspapers about 40 years ago when every time I opened the newspaper, there was nothing good in them. So I just stopped reading
Was
them
there ever
completely.
anything good in
No,
that?
I don't think there ever was
No.
anyway. And I mean, I would watch the television really just to find out what was happening with the news. And even today, if I watch television, it's BBC. I just watch, the BBC news because I get worldwide news. I don't get shall we say, the American stuff that gets shoved down your throat here.
Yeah.
But yeah, if there was computer games around, I mean, I've tried computer games when my kids were growing up and they had computer games, but
Yeah.
but they're just not something that really they don't engage me enough. It's too tunnel vision for me. I like to look
Mm.
at the broader picture of what's going on around me. But it definitely been able to go out and get involved with community activities
Yeah.
and it comes back to the tribe. It doesn't matter what your tribe is. It can be a subdivision, it can be a team at school, it can be anything. But I think tribe is very, very important. There's somewhere that I want to go here, and it's like it's in the back of my mind, and I'm just trying to find the right words for it. But one of my most recent experiences is running the escape room business.
Mm.
Okay. Now, for those of you that may not know what an escape room is, I'm sure most people do. You don't get locked into a room and have to escape. It's a themed room where there are puzzles that you have to solve to work your way through the game. So it's kind of a game. It's an interactive game. And the staff that I had running this business, it was a very, very successful business. We had 8 different games, all themed differently. We had a pirate one, we had a Scooby-Doo one, we had a laboratory one, a haunted mansion. So different types of things. Almost all the staff that we employed at that business, and we had 12 to 15 people, were guys and girls that were anything from high school age, so that's literally 17 years old, through to 23, 24. So mainly young people that were either at school or were at college or had decided not to go to college but were looking for another career. So I had 5 years of dealing with people, both guys and girls of that age group.
Right.
And so I've got quite a lot of experience of actually what we're talking about here today through that.
Mm.
Now, the people that we employed, there were basically 3 different positions, but everybody started off as a host. And as a host, you're dealing with the customers when they come in the store, you're talking to them, you're engaging them. You have to learn to basically explain to them what the business is about, what the game is about that they're going to play, and then you help them to go into the room, brief them going in the room, and then when they finish playing the game, you take them out of the room, take a photograph, say thank you very much. So it's customer service. You are teaching people to communicate. Okay. The other side of the business, once they've learned all that side of the business, is going into the rooms and resetting the room. So after you play a game, you've got to put all the props and everything back in place. Okay. That's attention to detail. Totally different skill set, but everybody has to learn it. And eventually, when you're good, you start to time yourself. So now you're giving yourself a challenge because you're seeing how fast you can actually put all that stuff back in place again. And there was little competitions we used to have, and you'd get a $25 gift card for the fastest person at a certain time. The next set of skills you learn when you learn how to reset the games, the games, you become a game master. A game master is like playing a computer game, but with real people. You're looking at a TV screen that has multiple cameras. You are helping the people in the rooms. You're sending them clues. You're answering questions. So it's very, very focused, but looking like a computer game, right? And you don't run one game at a time. The game masters are running 3 or 4 games at a time. So you can have 8 people playing a game, and you can have 4 times 8 people. That's 32 people that you're responsible for making sure they have a good time. That's what the business is all about. So where am I going with this? How do you pick people that you're going to hire? Because you don't hire people as a game master straight away. They've got to learn the business. It's like starting off as a deckhand and becoming the captain. The captain is the game master. All right. So we had to pick people, and 9 times out of 10, the people that we interviewed had no communication skills whatsoever. They could be 17, 18 years old, high schoolers. They could be people that have been to college. We would interview people, and we do Zoom interviews. We'd interview people that have very good resumes, 5 years of customer service. They couldn't talk to anybody. I'd do a Zoom interview with people and ask them questions, and they'd just stare at me like a deer in the headlights. They had no idea. Did we hire those people? Yes, we did. Because it's a way of actually teaching them. What we made them was part of our tribe. This is where I'm coming with this, right? Because it was a great opportunity for us to actually take people from the outside world, bring them into our tribe, and teach them skills going forward. And the ones that succeeded were the ones that were able to embrace the job responsibilities. We hired high school girls that wouldn't say boo to a mouse. 3 months after coming to work for us, if they were literally throwing people out the door. That somebody came in drunk on a Saturday night. That's how good they got, because they got confidence in themselves. Now, there's a point I'm going here with this. Okay, the point is that a lot of the boys struggled more with the customer service side and the interaction than the girls did. The girls always seemed to have the ability to be able to deal with customers. What did the boys want to do? They wanted to become game masters because they were all gamers, and they wanted to sit in a room on their own, not have to deal with the real world, but they were very good at controlling what people were doing. And they were the best game masters we had were gamers. But because we made them go through the whole customer service thing, and once they got to become game masters, they didn't just sit there and be a game master forever. We used to make them go back up front and do customer service.
Okay.
But they were also very, very good at resetting the games because they became focused on what they were doing.
This is really interesting, because basically what you're saying is that, so community involvement, that is an escape room business.
Yeah.
With tribe, run by somebody like you who's taught people to do much more complex and dangerous things with much higher levels of responsibility. So you're not worried. You can get these people to where they need to go. And yet at the same time, it's very real. And that, to my mind, is a very interesting place to end up in this conversation, because you're in the gaming world there, in subdivision world. These things are happening in the suburbs, often in strip malls. I mean, they might be downtown, but a lot of escape malls are out, in strip mall land. It's tapping into what that generation knows. And I'm thinking, one of the other things that we've often looked at and done stuff with our autism work is LARPing, live action role play. Because it's also, and that world is a brilliant world for people that are sometimes neurodiverse. That, the Ren Fair world, the SCA. Those of you who don't know who the SCA is, we'll do a whole episode on the SCA. That's a great rabbit hole. But gaming, actually, because what is gaming? Gaming is when you do it live. Well, then you're back to your rugby team, aren't you? And
back to community.
You're back to community and having this challenge that you have to fulfill. When then you're back to the hunting and gathering group, you're back to the group of lads going out there with the spear, and there's an older one trying to keep them safe, but also enough risk that they can actually get the kill. There's the girls out there gathering, and it's very dangerous. They've got to dodge lions while they do it. They've got to track. They've got to know that this plant is poisonous and looks exactly like that one that isn't, and be on absolute high alert with that while keeping all the kids safe. And all of this takes a lot of communication. Communication takes time. So it's just really interesting that you ended up actually, I think, answering the question of what do we do, which is go reach out to an escape room. If you're that mum whose son can't come out the basement, perhaps you could do worse than to look up who's your local live action role play group and who's your
I mean,
escape room.
it is, there is, it's something that escape rooms can be played by kids as young as 7 years old and really, really enjoy it. And we've seen over the 5 years of running that business, we've seen multiple families that every time we'd have a new game, they play all our games. The whole family would come, they play all our games, we get a new one. They would hassle us when you open in a new game so we can come back and play.
You've convinced me. I'm going to take my kids to an escape room.
They were treating it as community, as a tribe.
Yeah, no, you've totally hit the nail on the head here, I think, Paul, because I did a podcast a few months back with a really interesting lady called Lainey Liberty, who took a year off to travel with her son, and they just never went back. And they now run a business together. And what they do is they do board games. They run gaming cafes, and it's very similar. It's
the same thing.
Yeah,
it's exactly the same thing. It's getting the kids, you know, if you get kids that are not sporty, and there's a lot of kids that aren't, the majority of them, I think, are not sporty at all. And you're not going to get involved with that type of community. Well, pick something else.
Yes.
Playing chess, you know, checkers, board games. Yeah. What we do here with friends, you know, we live in the countryside. We're miles from anywhere, right? But what do? Every month, there's 6 or 8 of us all get together, couples, and we play board games.
Yeah.
We sit round. We drink wine, we play board games, we talk. It's community.
Yeah, Lainey convinced me. She said, play board games with your kids, it'd be a game changer.
Yeah.
And I hadn't been. You know, I thought, oh, I don't need to do that. You know, we're out with the horses. We do. And I thought, no, she's right. And we started, and it completely changed the family dynamic.
It does.
So that is, listen to your Auntie Paul, mums.
Yeah, there you go.
Start going to the escape rooms together, and maybe your son can escape the room that he's in and escape into somewhere. It's got to start somewhere. I love that, because you know me, I'm such a proponent of nature.
Yeah.
But not everyone has access. And you also know how it is in Texas, for example. You've got to own that land. There's not much public land out there.
No. And it's also too hot a lot of the time.
It is too hot.
Want to go out, you know, in Texas, but other places not necessarily. There you go. Go find it.
All right, you answered the question. I thought we were just going to go round in philosophical circles. And that's so Paul, isn't it? It's like, well, actually, Rupert, here's a solution. I'm like, well, Paul, actually, you have.
But the thing is that if I'd have mentioned that right at the beginning, you know, then we'd have had nothing to talk about for the next 2 hours. So there we go. We got there in the end.
We got there.
An escape room.
All right. Well, I think let's end on that note. I've got to go get horses off the hill before it gets dark.
I'm going to go mow another 20 acres. So here we go.
All right. In the hot sun. All right.
In the hot sun.
All right.
All right, Rupert, you take care.
All right. I'm off to an escape room with my kids.
All right. Good luck. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you did, please help us to make more. Please like, subscribe, tell a friend, give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, please go to my website, rupertisaacson.com. And if you'd like to find out about our certification courses with autism, education, horsemanship, everyday shamanism, there's a whole range of cool stuff. Putting a show together like this is not an easy task. If you'd like to support us, please consider going to our Patreon page and showing us some love there. Even the smallest donation, it really helps us to keep the good content coming. So go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. Not to mention our excellent merch. Please go to our shop and check out some of our really cool rock and roll themed merch, t-shirts, hoodies, all that sort of thing. rupertisaacson.com. It's all there. I can't wait for our next guest and also to meet you there. In the meantime, remember, live free, ride free.